Well, for more on China's strategy to open up its financial sector, let's bring in Dan McClory, Managing Director and Head of China at Boustead Securities. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rachelle.
So, Dan, what are the most significant aspects of this policy change?
Well, I think overall, it's extremely consequential. Whenever you open up an industry that has $33 trillion of assets under management, and you create additional opportunities for external participants to come in and have a fair share at that market, I think it's really big news. And remember, this has taken quite some time. It was at China's ascension to the WTO in 2001 where they announced this coming opening up of the financial markets. And so now we're hearing about it. And they've actually put some dates to it, and they put some percentages behind it. So I think it's big, and I think it's an example of being able to perhaps lift not just the profile, but perhaps the stature of financial services in China by some influx of foreign talent.
So then, Dan, how do you think that this will impact domestic companies in the financial sector as well as the equity market in China?
Well, I think that's the other side of the coin. So there's optimism and there's large potential market share available, but you're bringing up the fact of there's an existing market, and what does that market look like? And pessimistically, that market looks like many banks have overextended themselves to state-owned enterprises, and the opportunities now may be with small and mid-sized companies. And I've got to say that's an area where there's great opportunity and there's also great encouragement from Beijing. It's to get the money from the people that have it to the people that don't. And invariably, it's the small and mid-sized companies. So there's an existing system that has already decided to deploy capital in a certain way, and now the openings are going to come from alternative ways of deploying the capital to perhaps other market segments.
Now, what about if you're an individual investor within China? What sort of impact do you think they should be looking for?
I think they'll like it. They'll like the advent, potentially, of the newfound availability of perhaps foreign-backed, if not actually foreign-sourced, investment products. As you know, the Chinese are voracious savers, and they're looking for ways to deploy their capital. And the money market rates, although they're much higher than some funds from outside of China, really don't get to the highest levels that they'd like to see. So I think there's going to be a great deal of interest, but I also think there's going to be a great deal of opportunity in terms of the domestic stock market, where you're going to see foreign participants being able to more actively become involved, which will open the door for new offerings and new investors from within China.
So given this announcement then, how do you think some of these foreign financial firms are going to react?
Well, certainly the ones we've heard from already have said they are open to the concept. I think Citigroup, which had recently closed some branches and withdrawn a little bit, says they're willing to take another crack at it. Goldman Sachs welcomed it. But the level that I like to assess is right here in the U.S., where we're working every day on listing Chinese companies on U.S. stock exchanges. And we have one company called KBG Group out of Suzhou. It'll be the first RMB-denominated PE fund to list in the U.S. This is a tremendous opportunity. This is now going to open them up to the possibility of foreign ownership to take advantage of all of the acumen they have. Their leading fund managers, Sabrina Guo and others, that to this date have not been able to avail themselves of foreign capital. So I think it's going to open opportunities at a number of levels.
Now, what about competition? How do you think that's going to affect competition between the domestic and the foreign firms?
You bring up a great point, Rachelle. I mean, certainly the entrenched domestic firms, they've got the inside track. They've probably picked up not just some of the better opportunities, but some of them are saddled with some of the more challenging opportunities of these zombie companies we hear about and these state-owned enterprises that are somewhat inefficient, which Mr. Li, the premier, has taken great steps to try to normalize. So there will undoubtedly be competition, but I think the foreign entrants will be looked to for innovation, for bringing outside approaches. And this could start with the composition of things like initial public offerings, perhaps even insurance products that we heard about earlier. But let's be certain to keep one thing in mind, Rachelle. There is still China's systemic approach to financial services, which is certainly based upon policies that are coming from the government and less of a totally open market approach. So I think that's going to be one challenge to foreign firms, is how are they going to exist with talent and capital that they'll bring within that system, which they'll really have a large learning curve, and it's not directly comparable to what they've seen in Europe or North America.
So then, Dan, to your point then, what advice would you give then to foreign firms who want to take advantage of the opportunities but aren't sure how?
Well, clearly what they've done to this point, which is partner up with local firms, and that was by mandate, now it's going to become optional. I would continue to stay that course. There are many things that foreign firms can add and help accentuate to the domestic financial services companies in China. So I think it's almost a pooling of the best practices. I mean, the example that comes to mind is we're all familiar with professional sports. How about when professional basketball made its way into China? And when you started to see foreign players land on these teams, what did it do? It increased the level of play. It brought the talent pool up another step, because if you or I want to get better at something we do, the only way to do so is to work with people better than us. So I think that's going to be a nice impetus for raising the game in China in financial services, and I would encourage foreign entrants to find local partners, to find their way because of the system, and then break out on their own.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that basketball analogy there. Thank you so much, Dan McClory, Managing Director and Head of China at Boustead Securities.